Welcome back. A good morning this Monday morning. Now, the weekend was full of the continuing combat over the Constitution, whether to amend it, the referendum, and the different combatants, whether in CORD or Jubilee. And of course, you remember what happened in Bomet over the weekend when there was a confrontation between the supporters of the Deputy President and the supporters of the Governor, Isaac Ruto. This just goes to show that the conversations around this referendum are getting more heated. But we need to shed more light on the process and exactly what the scenarios look like in the future. So this morning we are getting in a bit of an expert opinion away from the combatants to look at the dynamics of amending this constitution and the referendum and what is going on. And I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Karuti Kanyinga, a political science and a lecturer in the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nairobi. Karibu Daktari. Okay. And Waiko Wanyoike, a constitutional lawyer from Katiba Institute, which we know has been very active on constitutional affairs, going to the Supreme Court and so forth. We should be in safe hands this morning. Should I say that? Yeah, let's start with your general views about what is going on. So far, there's a movement. CORD has pushed, now Okoa Kenya has moved its agenda to the point of now taking up signatures. The Council of Governors seems to be still in the woodwork. What is your assessment of the progress so far? If I may start with you, Karuti. Are we on the right path? What are the prospects looking like? Yeah,
let me begin saying that we are a country in a crisis of leadership and a crisis of ideas. Because it's not long time ago since we passed this new constitution. It's 2010. And now that we're having difficulties in implementing the same constitution, we want to amend it. And there is then no guarantee at all that even the amended articles will be implemented themselves. So the first problem and the challenge we have is having difficulties that we want to resolve through amendments, yes, even before we have already implemented what we have. The second challenge we have is that we have no guarantors of this constitution, and guarantors in terms of the people who can defend it and defend it without self-interest. What we have seen on both the side of government and the side of the minority are people who are driven by self-interest and motivated by the quest for power, if I can say that. The most unfortunate thing is that we don't have even an alternative force. We don't have a land force. We don't have religious organizations that used to be actually giving sober direction. They are no longer in place. Civil society itself seems to be playing it weak in terms of providing direction, in terms of how we need to go. So I'm simply saying that looking at the direction that things are going, I can only say that we are actually in a crisis mode. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the talks about referendum are not resolving the difficulties that we have. We are becoming even much more polarized. Mm-hmm. We are polarized around the question of the referendum, and as we move on, we shall as usual be polarized along the question of ethnic divide, which is not very good. We may actually go back to 2005, where we were a few years ago, if we don't get leadership to get that out of this particular debate.
Okay, so you think leadership is a big issue here? Yeah. On the one hand, government interested in self-preservation. Yeah. On the other hand, opposition interested in power. Using the referendum approach. Waiko, what do you think? I mean, are the mechanics in place? Are the systems in place? Are we approaching the constitution, amendment of the constitution right? Are the logistics favorable? Will it work? Those are many questions.
Will it work? It's hard to determine that at this very early stage. But as has already been mentioned by Dr. Karuti, there are serious problems, and I think what we've done is to put the cart before the horse. Mm-hmm. We've not been able to have a conversation of what is the nature of the problem and what are the reasons behind these problems and what are the best solutions. And unfortunately, the Constitution itself provides us mechanism, it provides us with solutions on how to handle some of these things. As Professor has said, the bigger problem is a problem of leadership, both in Jubilee and CORD, and even the larger Kenyan society. As you can see, when the governor started, they were all united. behind the issue of pesa mashinani. They all were telling us they want pesa mashinani. But just recently, we've seen governors going back on their promise just because of the political side of divide that they're in, which tells you that it's not really about the issues. It's about allegiance, it's about political survival. And so what we've failed miserably at doing is to actually follow one principle of the Constitution, which is the principle of good governance.
Yeah.
In fact, if we were to resolve that one issue, what is good governance, and is what we are doing either through a referendum or campaigning against a referendum, good governance, then we would have resolved all these problems.
Well, the question has been asked whether it is early or is time to amend the Constitution. The argument being that we are not even through the implementation phase, which ends, I think, sometime next year, 2015 or 2016, when we will have implemented or given force to the articles in the Constitution through legislation. Is it, what would be your, let me just say, what would be your response to this, Oekwa? Too early?
One cannot say that there is anything too early for the Constitution, because the Constitution itself didn't contemplate that any process of its amendment would be too early. But there is very good reasons for people to be arguing that it's too early, because we are still in the implementation phase. So let's take, for example, this pesa mashinani issue. We are still setting up devolution systems. We've just gone through the first audit, a significant audit by the Auditor General relating to the difficulties that counties have had in terms of absorbing the money and actually administering it. We know there are problems. We don't blame them, because you need time to set up the systems. And so what we should be asking at this point is, do we have systems in place, and have we tried things and they have not worked? Don't forget, again, talking about devolution and additional money, we actually maybe don't even need a referendum to get additional money, because the Constitution only talks about a floor, 15%. It doesn't talk about a ceiling. So if there was goodwill, we could get that 40 or 45% that is requested. But we know there is no goodwill in Jubilee, and partly why the governors have been very, very vocal is because they've been frustrated by the national government, and especially the Jubilee side. Again, it's not an issue of referendum, it's an issue of good governance. So what if we get 45%? Do we know that counties actually need 45%? We've not even done costing.
Yes.
We never did proper costing. We never did proper functional analysis. So we don't know how much counties need. We also don't know how much national government needs. We know national government is holding a lot of money that it shouldn't be holding. They are creating dummy parastatos just to be able to keep certain money that should be going to counties. So it really comes down to that one
that
issue.
The government retains a lot of the functions. 40 functions have been retained at the national government, and just 14 farmed out to the counties. And that what has gone to the counties, roughly will, and that was the argument, or rather the logic that ended up in the allocation 15% in the Constitution, on the basis that those functions which went out to the counties would generally account for about 15% of the budget. So this quest is in that legitimate argument by the governors and the court.
Two things. Let me begin by agreeing my colleague Oekwa here that it's not a question of the time when the Constitution can be reviewed. The problem is that we have not audited the Constitution to see which particular articles we have challenges with, which particular articles have got a major problem for the Kenyan society, which ones do not support the growth of the society the way we would like it to happen. Now, the second thing is that no one has actually sat down to analyze this particular Constitution and say that if we continue with this particular system, if we continue with this particular article, we are going to have problems in the future. So we are simply saying we are going back to the amendment of the Constitution when we have not sat down to analyze it properly look at what is difficult to implement and so on.
But Ford did identify 13 things, which reduced to 4. Are you saying those are not issues?
Those are not issues. Those are issues that we have difficulties implementing. And there is no guarantee that even if we amended the constitution, these are going to be implemented. The issue of political commitment, the issue of leadership on both sides, make it extremely very difficult to implement even the 15 or even the 4 that we are talking about. There are things that do not require amending the constitution. He has already cited the example of the money to the county government. Who says 20% is enough or not enough? Who says 60% is not enough or not enough? We are simply saying, when you look at the way we are approaching the whole issue, we have not brought evidence to bear on what actually needs to be amended in this constitution.
But if you haven't given when they are collecting signatures,
let's look at some of the questions that
have they not put the questions?
Look at those particular questions.
Can you enumerate it? Tell them what are they?
If you look at those particular questions, there is one that talks about increasing the revenue to the devolved government,
yes.
And that's the question of that's the question we are saying, that it doesn't have a ceiling, doesn't have the bottom line. There is also the question of the powers of the Senate itself, and remember the powers of the Senate was introduced way back in Naivasha, and that was killed. So they want also to have an idea
in fact, item number 1 on the code referendum. Sheet. I'm trying to find the right word for it. Yes. There's no question. There is a form that on which they're soliciting the signatures.
They are not questions. They are issues.
They're issues. And the first one is increase of revenue allocation to the county governments and strengthen devolution.
Yeah.
Now, does that require a constitutional amendment?
I don't think it requires a constitutional amendment if we had good governance, because what the constitution actually anticipated is that you had to put a minimum figure of 15%, but it also contemplated that it didn't know what the cost will be for learning devolved units, and actually put mechanism through, for example, transition authority to make sure that proper costing was done. And once costing is done, that's when it will be able to determine what is the percentage. And by the way, it's not a fixed percentage. It could vary each year. Yes. Because it's based on costing.
Yes.
You know, when you talk about 15% and maybe saying that maybe that was enough, and that counties were supposed to get that, and the assumption was that it would be enough. It's almost like a scenario in a home when you have children. If you have 4 children, no doubt one of them or 2 of them might be more expensive to maintain than another. And that will vary, because sometimes maybe it's based on their education, whatever. Yeah. And that is what was contemplated by the Constitution. We've not done that, and so maybe we shouldn't be raising the question. We need to ask our leaders to go back, let them talk, let them dialogue.
And then allocate
the place where I think CORD has a point here is to say that we do not know even the present revenues collected by the national government, and therefore we are dealing with figures of 2009 and 2010, and that it's on basis of that the counties are getting their money. Yes. That if we were to go for the present revenue, the counties would be getting more money. CORD has a point there that we have not been
perhaps able then, but it's not going on to say that then once we have that amount based on the current allocation, that is enough. It's still not getting to that point of saying once we allocate based on the current budget, then that will be enough we will not need to amend.
Yeah, but you see, what Professor is saying is important, because what CORD is saying is that you've not been genuine to us. And to this extent, you know, we may be seen to be saying that there is no need for referendum. And referendum has different reasons, or there are different motivations for reasons. Clearly, the reason for this referendum is a political push. It's a government that has become recalcitrant. It doesn't want to talk to its own people and has become extremely arrogant. And that's why CORD is pushing for it. CORD may not be genuine about it. They may just be pushing for political reasons.
It's like you have given me no option.
Yes.
You're not listening to me, so then I'm going for the jugular to get my rights.
Well, of course, CORD needed this referendum to survive or to resuscitate itself. And the government, of course, because of its own belligerent attitude, of course, has given them an opportunity to resuscitate themselves. So we have seen both of them playing to each other. It's a wake-up call from both of them. Both of them need perhaps this in order to demonstrate their relevance.
Let's look at other issues.
Yeah, the other issue is number 2 on the list of code referendum issues is to strengthen the role of the National Land Commission and defer the role of and benefits of commissions and general commissions and allocate them more resources. Basically, National Land Commission is the main one, but other commissions also are being starved of resources, so they need more resources allocated to that and their roles secured. The Land Commission has been having a lot of difficulty. The ministry is encroaching, or is it the Land Commission encroaching on its territory? None of them agrees on what the Constitution exactly mandated each institution.
Let me begin by saying I don't know what is referendum about the National Land Commission. Where the problem lies is that there are 2 laws that were passed by Parliament, and those 2 laws are contradictory. The 2 laws are giving the National Land Commission powers that are also being given to the State Department of Lands. Why not review the laws that are actually making them conflict? The second thing is that the National Land Commission needs to up its game, right? But first of all, we need to review the laws that have actually created the National Land Commission and given it the powers, and also review the other laws that are giving the State Department of the Ministry of Agriculture the powers that are giving the Ministry of Lands, that are giving them the opportunity to do what they are doing. That clash. That is clash based on law.
In the statute.
It's not based on the Constitution.
Yeah, but you know, the question of the National Land Commission, and it's, to me, there is a complaint, but is it a referendum complaint? We know that this question is before the Supreme Court. We are actually involved in that case as Katiba Institute, and so I wouldn't be able to comment too much on it. But when you go to the Constitution, you find that the Constitution anticipates or requires that commissions have to be funded properly to be able to operate, and not just commissions, all organs of government. What we've seen is questions whether the National Land Commission, as well as other commissions, are being properly funded, and what is the motive behind that, and is it sabotage? And that is the question. But if you actually implement the Constitution, where you started this conversation, if you implemented the Constitution properly, then you cost what National Land Commission needs vis-a-vis the ministry. Maybe the National Land Commission needs more, so it is the one to be allocated more money to be able to perform its functions. But when you start from a position that you don't like the commission, and so for that reason you'll starve it of the money, and then we say we want a referendum, what will the referendum do? So what if we insert a provision, but the Jubilee government again doesn't honor? We know they have majority in Parliament, both at the National Assembly and the Senate. What are we going to do? Are we going to now have another referendum? It's really a question of good governance.
So the matter is about leadership, goodwill, governance,
about leadership. And also let me say something about these national commissions that we have. They are very important. Chapter 15 commissions are very important in their own right. But each commission has got certain functions, and how you play those functions can determine actually how powerful you are, because it depends on how you articulate, how you operationalize your functions. There's no commission that is less powerful or more important than the other, but it depends on how you transform yourself and how you
exercise your mandate.
You exercise your mandate and re-engineer yourself. Now, if you don't exercise your mandate and someone comes and tramples on you, you cannot go shouting
a referendum. That seems to be an indictment on the National Lands Commission.
No, I'm not saying it's the National Land Commission.
My inference, because you said it has to up its game. I mean, it seems to be squeaking under the foot of the minister.
But the point I'm making is that look at your mandate, start exercising your mandate in a very appropriate way, become very effective, and people know that you exist.
All right. The next question issue is electoral reforms to strengthen the electoral system to ensure free, fair, transparent, efficient, accurate, and accountable elections. That is about the IBC, the big issue. Yes, what do you have to say?
The first thing I should have said is that the way the issues are framed is important. Some people have criticized CORD or LOCOA movement for framing the issues that way. In actual fact, the Constitution does seem to suggest that they can do that. The Constitution expects when you go to a referendum, you can either have the actual bill or put a question or what they call a general suggestion. And so they've given general suggestions. But having said that, it's very, very important that again we go to the issues of should OCOA be giving us more? Should we be knowing the exact issues that it will be framing? So when we come to the IBC, for example, or the electoral system, when you go to Article 81 and Article 86 of the Constitution, all those terms are there. They are there. Right?
Let me make a point on these electoral reforms that they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think when we went to the referendum, the main challenge that Kenyans had in 2010 when they were voting for this constitution was to vote for a very large National Assembly, vote for the Senate, and vote for the county assemblies at the same time, using the electoral system of first past the post. So we have ended up having a national rally in the name of the National Assembly with 349 members of parliament. We have also to directly elect members of county assembly and elect directly members of the Senate. In many countries, people are changing away from first past the post to mixed member proportional representation, where you have a national assembly that has got people directly voted for and also others coming through the political party route. This way, we should be building political institutions like political parties. If OCOA Kenya was interested in acquiring Kenya the way it is, they should be talking about reducing the number of National Assembly, reduce it to about 210,
yes,
make it even 290, but let's also have it mixed member proportional representation.
Right.
The way many people are going in order to build institutions of political parties.
Yes.
Let's have a Senate that is elected through proportional representation rather than being elected directly as members. That way then we shall be saying they have got interest in this particular country, they want to reduce the wage bill, but not self-interest. But the way it is now, we can see that the main interest is not really...
No one wants to tackle that, because once you go after those particular people you're mentioning, reducing their numbers, they will fight the same referendum.
But that's what Kenya needs. That's what Kenya needs. If Kenya is interested in acquiring Kenya, let them go to that particular fundamental problem.
Can I say something? You know, the problem with it's not the electoral system. We all know the problem is with IBC.
Yes.
We have no confidence in IBC, and even the Jubilee is pretending to say that it has confidence in IBC.
Yeah.
And by the IBC, I mean the commissioners and the management of IBC, because you can't disband the commission. We need the commission,
yes,
or we need a similar structure.
Yes.
And if the similar structure is just about changing the name, then we don't need a referendum. What we need is somebody to tell Hassan and his team, you guys have to leave. It's actually good for the country. It's good for Jubilee.
Yeah.
You can't, it's like a court. If somebody doesn't have a confidence in the judge, and the judge keeps insisting that they will
you remove
sit
yourself
on the case,
from the matter.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's what the IBC needs to do. But when Jubilee tries to defend IBC, when in fact just last week we saw such damning report from even the Auditor General, when their secretary is in court, and we know that it's not just the secretary who should be in court, it's actually probably quite a number of commissioners and employees. There is a problem. So what we need is for Jubilee to actually come on board and say, you know what, it's not worth it. Let's change these commissioners. Let's have a process of changing the commissioners. Let's talk to them. Let's ask them to leave. They're Kenyans.
Yeah. And they can be paid.
And they can even be paid out.
And leave.
I'm not sure we need to pay them out after they've done what they did.
Well, unless you find them guilty, you have to pay them.
We removed Kavito's people. See, we remove them. And now we remove another one. For how long will you keep on removing?
I think we need to not just remove people, but take them to jail for responsibilities or for committing offenses. When you go to the Elections Act, and I'm not saying this in jest, and actually look at some of the things that seems to have happened with the Electoral Commission, and you look at the elections offenses, there are questions whether these people should be holding office in the first place, and especially when you look at Chapter 6. So it's not just a question of removal. That's not where we should be stopping. If people are culpable criminally, and I think to some extent some of them are, they should be going to jail, so that next time somebody seeking that position, they know it's not just about driving big cars, looking good, wearing good suits and all that, and telling people how...
Yeah. So the thing is that we need to be appealing. What Waiko is suggesting, that we need to be, two things need to be happening. One is that Jubilee need not be defending IBC, because once they do that, they begin to own a side of it. Two, we need to be appealing to the moral compunction of the commissioners to step aside, because one party or to the game has no confidence in you. And it's like in the case of a case in court where you say the judge will not be fair, whether it's perceived or real, the judge is morally compelled to step aside to remove themselves from appearance of prejudice.
All that we need, Mutegi, is to have an institution that insulates itself from the politics of the day. So it does not matter how many times we throw IMBCs out of the window. How many times we throw them out is going to depend on the extent to which they remain objective and to the cause. By the time we were going for the elections in 2013, everybody in this new country knew that the IEBC was divided into two factions, aligned to two different political camps in the country. And that politicization continues to date, and therefore when people say that credibility of IEBC is in doubt, they are trying to raise a very fundamental question. Can we have faith in you trying to superintend future elections?
Right.
And until we resolve the question of institutions remaining above board, then we shall not be able to...
So is that a question of referendum?
Exactly. Is that a referendum? Must that question go to the referendum? Or again, is a question of statutes?
The question is, what is the question? Are you going to change Article 86? Are you going to disband the commission? Are you going to reduce the term of the commissioners? And by the way, if you do that, then that means also for future commissioners. What is the question? So we need to be genuine.
The suggestion, as you said, there are now suggestions, is to make election reforms to strengthen the electoral process and the electoral body. Well, that is it. Let's look at number 4. To make provisions for the enforcement of ethnic inclusivity, equity and diversity in public appointments, and increase representation of women, youth and people living with disability. That's been a big one. Inclusivity. How do you couch this into law, into a constitutional provision? More than we have. Again, looks to me like leadership, governance.
I've drafted provisions. I don't know how you draft that, especially given that there are so many provisions within the Constitution that provides for that. Does Okoa have a genuine complaint? Yes, of course. When we seem to have made it that anybody who is heading the military or intelligence system has to come from a particular tribe. And it seems that that's a qualification. Of course, yes. When you audit, or when NCIC audited public service and found that only specific communities were represented, or majority, or just a few communities, and the professor is here, I think he is very aware of that, then they have a complaint. When we see how the appointments are happening, yes, but is it a referendum question, or is it just pure mismanagement by Jubilee that we actually need to resolve through political processes? I think it's the latter.
This seems to be another expression of frustration. Yes.
This is an expression of frustration, but it's also covered in the current constitution, where the constitution says appointments should reflect diversity of the Kenyan society.
And the face of Kenya.
But yes, I have done analysis of Kenyan public service from 1963 to date.
Right.
To date. Mm-hmm. And what shocked me is every single government has got public appointments tilted or biased in favor of the president's community, without exception.
That's true.
Not even Uhuru Kenyatta's government, not Kibaki's government, not Moi's government, not Kenyatta One government. And without exception, the security apparatus and provincial administration used to become the former provincial administration, the police, the general service, name it, provincial administration in general, or security apparatus used to be the most dominant in terms of which particular group, in terms of occupation by the president's community. That has not changed.
Yes.
That is not going to change until we have got political commitment or a government that is committed to make Kenya a very different society and break with the past. And let me say that most of the conflicts that we find in this country are a question of perception in terms of how is the government composed today. Where do these people come from? Are they coming from the president's community, or are they coming from elsewhere? And if any president were to be actually genuine in his own right, he will realize that actually bringing your own people does not help. You even get more mileage by getting people from elsewhere other than your own people. There is no way your people will ever run away from you, whether we want it or not. Your people can never run away from you.
Yes.
But other people run away from you. So if you go and become inclusive by making appointments based on Kenyan diversity itself, that's a mileage for you. But we are yet to see who does that.
Okay. So do you agree with Prof that issues as required by this suggestion or what are sought by this referendum actually have been provided for in the Constitution? It is the lack of implementation, governance, political leadership to execute what is in the Constitution.
I agree. I don't think any of these questions, if we were sincere with ourselves, should be going to a referendum. But I think it's important to say this, that the fact that we are having a referendum talk and the fact that it seems that the referendum is having traction, because we can't deny the fact there is quite some support, and I would say significant support for referendum, even when people don't know what the referendum is about. It shows that Jubilee has failed in leadership. Yeah. They are the ones in the magnanimous position. They're the ones to actually say that things are not working and we need to find solutions for these things.
Which means actually if Jubilee takes action, this referendum issues can be sorted out, and the referendum may not be necessary if they have the magnanimity, the statesmanship to lead in that direction.
The question I would have is, if CORD was to take national leadership, for example, or any of the people campaigning for national leadership, would they want 45% of the money is going to counties?
The counties.
When in fact they don't know how much counties need? I'm sure they would say no. And actually what might happen is 2018, if we have any of these guys in leadership, they will be asking us to go for another. So let's talk. Let's talk. The values of the Constitution.
The nuts and bolts.
Yes.
Finally, the number 5 on the agenda, strengthening of public institutions and constitutional commissions. That is already covered up there in the number 2, but also mentioned in number 4, constitutional commissions and strengthening of public institutions. I do not know which ones they are. They're not listed here, but that is number 5 in the question. That number 6, I think we don't even need to get into that, so we can jump into, because our time is not much. Any other amendments ancillary to the above amendments? That is the concluding one. What would you say about that as a constitutional lawyer?
You have to. It's a good provision in the sense that with the amendments, certain things will also have to be amended that sometimes you don't anticipate would be amended in the
amending the others
amendment, so that you have harmony in the Constitution. But I wish we had the actual questions. But more importantly for me, I wish Jubilee realized that in fact the reason we have this talk about referendum is just its failure of leadership. And in fact, if it was to exercise magnanimity, then we may not be having these conversations. We wouldn't be wasting time with referendum. And the risk is we could end up having a referendum. And whether it succeeds or not, there will be difficulties with success, there will be advantages, but also we'll also have not solved the real problems, because we wouldn't have talked amongst ourselves.
Right.
Let me say that some of this is we have very clear solutions in the Constitution. Chapter 6 and Article 10 of the Constitution provide very clear direction on how Kenya can actually buttress some of these institutions. For instance, if we abide by articles, by Chapter 6 alone on integrity and leadership,
yes,
what is it that we don't, what is it new that we shall be talking about commissions and the strength that we want them to have? Yes. If we went to Article 10 and looked at the principles of governance there, what is it, what else is it that we require? So the point is, we have got a constitution that provides direction on how we should move as a country, but we have refused to effectively implement it. And the question then is, what tells us that we shall have it even properly implemented if we change these particular provisions? And that's where we go back again to the question we raised from the very beginning: leadership and governance. Leadership and governance. If we have got leadership that provides clear direction on how we should move as a country, and the Jubilee government itself coming to say that we have a clear departure with the past. This is the departure with the past. We are not going to do things as have been done before. Then we shall be having a very different track.
So we are here at the referendum moment because essentially of political intransigence, not wanting to listen, accommodate, talk, and sort out or enforce, implement what is in the law. Those are the requirements. These are the suggestions that Code or Core Kenya have put forward. But I have always this feeling that there are more issues. In fact, there are particularly difficulties with this constitution that are not being mentioned at all in this attempt to amend.
Definitely. For example, the issue that Prof raised, do we really need a National Assembly of 349 members, and most of them who never attend the sessions? Do we really need that? Do we need full-time county assembly members, and especially people who spend most of their time thinking how to sabotage governance and make money? Do we?
They will not take kindly to that description.
That's how they are described. Even if you go into the villages, that's how they are being described. There are people who are getting that $1 million shillings every year for different contracts and giving contracts to each other. They are sabotaging the devolution process. It's not even the national government that it's actually sabotaging devolution.
The structures and scope of representation needs to be reviewed. I mean, as a big issue in this constitution, right?
That's a big issue.
Bring down the budget, the cost of the constitution.
That's a big issue. These questions, I wish this referendum had questions about how do we actually implement the integrity provisions of the constitution, because we are stuck. We thought that leadership would change because we had Chapter 6, but it's not happened. I wish we were having those conversations. I wish we were having conversations about how do we ensure that the 2/3 that is required by next year, August, is actually implemented, because there is good reason for affirmative action, right? But I wish we were having conversations about how do we strengthen our intergovernmental relations, because, for example, Jubilee government and CORD, for that matter, have spent most of their time in Parliament trying to sabotage devolution. I didn't see CORD senators or parliamentarians being any better when we were talking about county development boards than Jubilee. But that's a direct sabotage of the system of devolution. I wish we were having those conversations.
And the big issue of women representation, 1/3, which we have failed to comply. We have breached the constitution with the permission of the Supreme Court.
We are waiting for next year.
An advisory, which based on the same constitution, saying we will have to achieve that 1/3 gradually, and give 2015 as the deadline. And but what is being done about 2015?
We have not seen even the women representatives in Parliament itself agitating around it. We have not seen them organizing about it. In fact, at the time when it was being discussed in Parliament, most of them were in New York.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the women representatives were in New York.
What I get from you guys is that you're saying this matter can be resolved if there was conversation. CORD asked for dialogue before they went to referendum cost. The president agreed initially. Then Ruto, the deputy president, disagreed. And then there's quagmire there. How do you see that? Can it be reinstated?
That's what we are calling leadership.
Is that leadership? Is it possible to happen?
I think it is possible, but I think the bigger problem is this country, for some reason, has perfected in the art of getting mediocre leadership. And this is part of the reason, because if we didn't have mediocre leadership, then people would be willing to sit down and have a conversation. People would be willing to say, you know, the people who are asking for referendum are Kenyans, and we need to listen to them. But also the people asking for a referendum would be able to say, is this the best way? And should we be looking at other ways? What can we do to assist the situation? But we're not having that.
You know, Mutegi, we are living in a country where self-interest is far much more important than national interest. The reason why there was no dialogue is not because dialogue would have undermined any of them. The reason why there was no dialogue is that each of them was looking at the self-interest that are being motivated or not motivated or diluted on account of having a discussion with each other. Now, if they were thinking about commitment to national principles and national interests, dialogue would have taken place. But one would not have expected dialogue to take place in political rallies. Neither would dialogue have taken place in churches. Dialogue would have taken place where each of them call each other and say, let's sit down and ask ourselves what's best for this country. You saw it during the Westigate.
Yeah, let me ask.
You saw it during Westigate. Yeah. It was very clear
when
dialogue.
Tragedy strikes, maybe we need a tragedy to unite us.
Perhaps we need another tragedy to strike so that they can come together.
God forbid. But the point is, as we conclude, is it all lost? I mean, we are all talking about leadership, lack of it, governance. These are issues that don't need to be driven to a referendum. Is it all lost if you scan the environment, political environment? Is there somebody going to emerge from the moon and bring these guys together? You know, and then we sort out these issues? Or who, in fact, would you propose? What intervention is required to unlock this stalemate from the two of you?
You know, Professor Saitoti used to say the back.
Yes.
And in my view, on these issues, the back clearly stops with the president. He's the most senior citizen in the country, with all the powers that he needs to help start resolving these issues. You know, if the president was to approach these things sanely and outside the political partisanship, and was actually able to invite a core movement or CORD genuinely, because the other question is sometimes they do this just for political gimmick. I think it would resolve a lot of issues, because if CORD wasn't taking that olive branch, then what would happen? Kenyans would know that they're not also genuine. But we don't know that. And the president has also decided to be as partisan as members of National Assembly. I think the president needs to step aside and actually start initiating the process for dialogue. We have problems.
But presidents most of the time they are they are locked up by the people around them.
That's what we are saying, that even if he's
disentangle himself.
He can disentangle.
There's only one president.
Initially he said yes, we can have a dialogue.
All right.
No.
Well, okay.
He can disentangle himself by saying that the nation is far much more important than the people around me. And that has been done before. We have seen during moments of crisis, even during Kibaki, he would come out of wherever he was and perhaps call people around and they move forward. Now, the only unfortunate thing this time round in this country, in the history of this country, we have never had a situation of this nature without the armed forces that can actually try to come in and provide direction. But religious leaders are no longer in place. They are as partisan. They are as partisan as the political groups that we have. So I don't know where we are going to get a land force that is going to provide alternative leadership and provide a bridge around which the two leaders can
civil society, law society, ICJ.
You know, Mr. Mutegi, when you say the president is tethered by people around him, and that is why he cannot take the lead, then we have a serious problem. Because if the president cannot disentangle himself, which other citizens should be able to disentangle?
The reason why I'm saying that is because initially he had said yes, then later on he changed his mind.
But then that shows that he has a problem with leadership.
Yes.
Because if he was a principled leader and he knows that that is the right thing to do, and by the way, he's required by the Constitution. Because if you look at the provisions relating to the presidential functions, they expect him to rise beyond those partisanship. And if he can't do that, then there's a problem. Maybe he also needs to tell us whether he wants to execute his mandate as the president.
Yeah, but we need to say that both the president and the leader of CORD are also actually required to disentangle themselves from the people around them and move forward and say that this country is far much more important than any of them, and to give us direction on this matter. Sit down and agree on how to move forward.
All right. Thank you very much. That was Waikwa Onyeke from the Katiba Institute, a constitutional lawyer, and Dr. Karuti Kanyinga from the Institute of Political Science, a political science scientist and researcher of great standing. He's been doing a lot of Institute for Development Studies, not of Development Studies. All right, that is it this morning. We had a discussion to shed more light on the referendum push, whether we need it, and what are the failures that have led us to this pass, to this situation, and whether we can extricate ourselves from it and have perhaps another way forward without a referendum. It is all about leadership, governance, and the buck stops with number one, the president.